Muy buenos días, soy Dulce Vázquez y a nombre de CAF
Good morning, the Development Bank of Latin America. I'd like to welcome you to this edition of the CAF Conference, the new economy of the SMEs in Latin America. This is a conference that we are broadcasting from Mexico City virtually. We will talk about the challenges and opportunities of SMEs in Latin America in their adaptation to a more and more complex, exacerbated by the COVID-19 crisis. We will have 2 days of conference, and we have 34 speakers here, 17 women, 17 men from different horizons. In this day, the first panel will be talking about the consequences of this crisis, the keys to reactivation, and the jump to a new economy. During the second panel, we will be talking about the challenges and the opportunities represented by global value chains for small and medium enterprises. Tomorrow, we will be talking about the digital transformation. We will be sharing success stories, and we will be talking about the challenges in terms of public policy. We'd like to invite you to join the conversation in social media with hashtag CAFPYME and to follow our @CAF in different social networks such as Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We are broadcasting in English, Spanish, and Portuguese, and in the original version in our website, caf.com, our YouTube channel, and our LinkedIn and Facebook accounts. We'd like to thank media partner El País and El Economista. Next, we will be starting today, our day, with the words of the president of CAF, Luis Carranza Ugalde. Good morning. Mr. Jose de Luna, head of the Public Credit Unit at the Ministry of Finance in Mexico. Distinguished panelists, friends, I am pleased to welcome you to this annual conference in a semi-presential mode from Mexico City. Our societies throughout history have been affected both in terms of politics, economy, and socially by large technological revolutions. And this is a particular case because after the pandemic, the digital transformation of our societies is speeding up. This generates important challenges, huge opportunities, and what we want to do here with you is to reflect upon the way our SMEs are able to face these challenges. From CAF, we have an ambitious agenda with regards to the digital transformation. It is based on 3 pillars. The first one is how we support our states in this digital transformation process by debating improvements on public policies, regulatory enhancements, the way we increase transparency and integrity in management, and how we're able to help our municipalities to become intelligent or smart cities. We are also supporting closing the gap in infrastructure, mainly in rural areas. And we have an agenda to support SMEs in their digital transformation. However, our SME agenda goes beyond this. This year, which has been a very complicated year, we have redirected credit lines for $1.6 billion in order to support local development banks in their financial strategies towards SMEs. We have funneled or channeled resources, commercial banking in terms of lines and collaterals in order to support SMEs. Likewise, we have doubled our lines for microfinancing firms. They are at the trenches providing support to micro enterprises, which are the most affected in this pandemic process. But we are also supporting the non-financial side by means of innovation programs, patent programs, internationalization, and especially of integration within value chains and business clusters. This is an important agenda It is an agenda on which we are basing our inclusive development vision of productivity enhancement and of following the path towards prosperity in Latin America. Thank you all very much for your participation in this event. Thank you very much, President Carranza. We will continue with the opening session, and we would like to welcome Mr. Jose de Luna, Head of the Public Credit Union and International Affairs at the Ministry of Finance in Mexico. Thank you very much, Mr. President Carranza, distinguished panelists, guests, ladies and gentlemen. I am very pleased to be here taking part in this important seminar on the SMEs in Mexico and in Latin America. On behalf of the Ministry of Finance, I would like to welcome you to this important event, and I would like to take advantage also to give my apologies from the Minister of Finance, Mr. Herrera. He was unable to attend this event due to some agenda constraints. I'm certain that he would have been very pleased to take part in this session, especially because of the fact that SMEs are very important for the Ministry of Finance. I'd like to explain why. SMEs, in the case of Mexico, are generating 70% of all the jobs in the economy. Besides, SMEs contribute with at least 51% of the GDP, meaning that these companies are of essence for a sound economy, for its performance, and for its prosperity. I would briefly like to share with you how we at the Ministry of Finance look at some of the main challenges that are faced by SMEs. One of the challenges in this group of companies is linked to the high rate we still have of high mortality rate, especially in new companies, in recently created companies. Less than 50% survive their first year, and this figure goes down during the second year. We would like in the future to have an ecosystem that will enable for a higher survival rate of firms. And for this purpose, it is necessary to invest in better skills, better business skills, in a higher capacity to understand markets, to do business, financial planning, access to credit, a sale of products, accounting, integration to the value chains, etc. A second challenge we find for SMEs is linked to the low level of mobility among groups of companies. What do I mean by this? By this, I mean to say that when a company is classified as small, it is very likely that it will remain as such throughout its life cycle. Very few companies with a small company classification become medium-sized companies. The same holds true for medium-sized companies. Very few of them jump into the next category of large enterprises. In the future, I would like Mexico and, of course, all of the Latin American region to have companies with growth rates that could be more accelerated. And why not to have a greater presence in the global enterprise market with multinational companies that come from the Latin American region? A third challenge that we have seen is linked to informality. In Mexico, many of the firms, especially micro and small companies, are informal companies that are not duly registered, and this affects their productivity, it affects their access to credit, and it also has effects in the long term on a low performance in our economies. And this is why targeting the informality program and incentivizing micro business people to register and to become a part of the formal economy should be a priority to all of us. The current situation has had a very strong impact on the economy, especially SMEs, which has been translated into lower sales and the closing of some companies. This situation has brought with it new opportunities as well. I'd like to quickly talk about two opportunities that we find for SMEs. One, this is digitalization. Lockdowns have changed consumer habits of the population, but it has also opened new opportunities for SMEs to be able to develop new business models so that they can find better distribution channels for their products and services, and so that they are capable of achieving higher productivity by means of using technology. In the future, another one of the opportunities, big opportunities, at least in the case of Mexico, is related to the recent ratification of the new trade treaty between Canada, the United States, and Mexico. This is a golden opportunity that we should all take advantage of, because access to the largest market in the world must be an opportunity for SMEs to increase our markets. It should also be an opportunity for SMEs to be able to obtain investments so that they are able to gain knowledge, gain technology, and so that together we are able to increase domestic content in national exports. I think that this is a wonderful opportunity that we should not let go. Finally, I would like to close by thanking CAF for organizing this important event. This topic is extremely relevant in the current context, the context of an economic recovery. Mexico has a good collaboration scheme with CAF, and we believe that in the future this will continue to become more important. We have a good relationship. We get their support by means of funding, but also by means of their technical assistance and by means of these type of events. Mexico is undergoing the process of becoming a full member of CAF, of the Bank of Development, of the Development Bank of Latin America. Thank you very much for your words. I'd like to remind you that you can share all your comments and questions to our speakers by means of hashtag CAFPymes in our agenda CAF. Next, we will start with our first session of today, entitled Crisis and Jumping Towards a New Economy and an Opportunity for Latin American SMEs. I'd like to give the floor to Mrs. Francisco Mareto from El País, who will be moderating this panel. Thank you very much. Good morning, and welcome to this section where we will be reflecting upon the reactivation of the economy and this jump towards a new economy, considering the challenge and the series of challenges that have been imposed to us by the crisis. For this purpose, well, I am honored to have here and to introduce Victoria Hernandez, Minister of the Economy and Industry and Trade of Costa Rica. Welcome. Good morning. Fernando Turner. He chairs the National Association of Business People in Mexico. Thank you very much. We also have Francisco Gonzalez, President of the Business Council Mexico-Panama, and Vice President of Promotion and Investment from South America at COMSE. Thank you. We also am honored to have here Patricia Armendariz, General Director of Financiera Sustentable. Good morning. And Jorge Arbache, Vice President of the Private Sector at CAF, the Development Bank of Latin America. Good morning, and thank you all for joining us this morning and for reflecting upon the impact that this crisis, COVID-19 crisis, has been reconfiguring for several months and speeding up some of the challenges that the economic fabric is facing, as well as SMEs. Terms like digitalization, automation have somehow changed the paradigm or are speeding up the changes in terms of the economy's paradigms. However, we also have risks in this context, and there are some SMEs in the region that may stay behind. So we will also be talking about that. I would like to begin with a general question on how the economic fabric has changed in this situation and how we are able to rethink its recomposition. I'd like to give the floor to the Minister of Economy, Industry and Trade, Ms. Victoria Hernandez. Thank you. And when we start to see how this has changed, I can tell you, well, the business models have changed, and we have to place SMEs, or they should enter the transformation model towards digitalization. We had this already, but not as aggressively as we do now. Not in all areas did people feel as involved in terms of new technologies. There are always myths and paradigms, and we have made many efforts at the Ministry of the Economy in order to deal with institutions that deal with technical assistance, the National Institute for Women, in order to strengthen some capacities. And we have also faced this challenge. It is very complex. And if we are following this path, people will realize that we have 4 or 5 steps to take. However, the way between these 4 to 5 steps is very, very difficult. We have had to deal not only in terms of digitization in order to improve the capacity to respond to these new technologies, and we have to invite them to use as formal instruments a return in order to continue. So we have to deal more in depth with these matters. Digitization, other business models, another thing is paperwork, another thing has been funding. Although companies have been very vulnerable, we have not been able to close completely, not the agricultural or industrial sector, not in a small or large scale. The most affected sector by me is services. We had to provide working capital to these sectors, and we had to establish development banks and public banks, as well as the private banking, different ways to access to resources. However, it is still not enough. Another important element is a systemic or structural weakness. We only have one possibility. We call this a tax, or this is a tax charged to banking institutions, and the Ministry of Finance does it. So we get this risk capital, and this is limited. We have had to sit down and think about where we can get more resources for debt capital, because there are some entities that are accompanying us. We see that things will be changing very much. However, what we aim at is to find opportunities within a framework of big uncertainties. I'd like to close for now, but if you want to listen to more details, well, I think we can listen to our colleagues. Yes, we can deal with more details later on. Thank you. Fernando Turner, you have the floor. Thank you very much for joining us. I believe that we have a sound problem. Oh, if my mic is off, it will be impossible for you to hear me. I think that we must begin by saying that SMEs in Mexico, as well as in other countries, are in the survival mode, far away from the necessary works in order to innovate and to create a future. What is this due to? In Mexico, there is no policy nor the right instruments in order to support SMEs. This dates back to several decades. There has been a bureaucracy, however, not an efficient policy. For SMEs, well, we have this omission. The SME sector is not present in the just debates with the government and the business community. Strategies in general that have been applied by the country, by the government, have not been adequate, have been shy and changing. There are no permanent steps in order to promote the creation and permanence of SMEs. And this is more serious than reality. We have established programs based on our spontaneous creativity, which is a characteristic of Latin American countries, without learning from other countries. Unfortunately, the comments that are made by Jose de Luna and the Minister of Finance show the lack of a vision in this sense. There is no vision of this problem, nor are there specific ideas or specific policies in order to overcome the problem. The lack of the right policies is general in terms of fiscal matters, technological, financial, educational, and banking matters. The only thing that is being promoted, that promotes the growth of SMEs, is the vitality and creativity of Latin American youth. Public monopolies or private monopolies and governments are the main enemies to conquer. What is necessary? We need to have a direct representation of SMEs before the government and legislators. One must organize SMEs. We need to formally create and permanently create something similar to an administration used in many countries, which is not subject to the comes and goes in politics, and to stop creating policies every administration. We need to more rigorously apply the laws of the government and competitions that will avoid large fish eating small fish. And we need to have new policies in order to create firms. We need to have incentives in order to become formal. And we also need to eliminate the banking rules that affect SMEs and special funding similar to the Small Business Administration. We need to also eliminate the restrictive monetary policy because inflation is not caused by demand, and it does increase the cost of financing and overvalues currencies. And we need to promote the purchase of domestic inputs beginning by the public sector and using commercial and financial measures. We must underscore that the existence of prosperous SMEs will generate many public assets. This is not always understood in our countries. There is a public asset within a growing set of SMEs. And these assets are oftentimes absent in our countries, such as sufficient employment, reduction of inequalities, abatement of poverty, and political and social instability. They come from the existence of the right set of SMEs. Unfortunately, these are pending tasks. These are situations that are not being dealt with, at least not in the country. And these are situations that are definitely worsening the traditional mortality of SMEs and their problems in terms of the pandemic. Thank you very much. I'd like to give the floor to Francisco González. Thank you very much. Thank you all very much. Good morning. I'd like to mention an important approach of the SME environment in Latin America compared to Europe. What about productivity? We have to, first of all, define that the productivity of MSMEs is important, and especially in our region. If we compare 100% of the productivity of a company in our country, a large company, the micro company has between 3 to 6% of productivity. The relative productivity, of course, involves higher costs and a series of issues when it comes, since they are not well digitized or they cannot speed up some processes. So costs turn into prices, and they bring about several issues. When we see countries like Spain, Germany, France, that productivity where 70% is of 70%. These effects have made Latin American and SMEs have a difficult situation. And this is one of the topics that I will be dealing with later on. This internationalization by means of a chain can become an advantage, a very important advantage for MSMEs.
And there is another important factor, not only the informality. We must take into consideration the amount of companies that are considered MSMEs. It is more than 90% in Chile, Ecuador, Peru, and Mexico, and between 8% and 90% in Brazil and Uruguay. Most of the companies, that is. In the case of big companies, we have 2%, like in Mexico. But in the case of medium and small companies, we are talking about a higher percentage. This implies that we have many companies in this category. So I agree with Fernando. We need to boost this sector, just like we do in the case of the small business administration policy in each of these countries, in order to increase the productivity of these companies so they can go international. What happened during the pandemic? This is information from or before COVID. According to the information that we've got, 59% of companies have had stoppages. This is only a survey. And the size of the companies that have implemented this measure is 40% in the case of big companies, 50% for medium companies, and 60% in the case of micro companies. The average 57%. So this means that micro companies have had the biggest impact, and they are the ones with the least possibilities to continue with their own resources. We can do some analysis using this information by tracking the different POSs, taking into consideration the use of credit cards. By means of this analysis, we can identify the highest impact. The highest impact is in services and restaurants. Industry has a lower impact. So, it is important to mention that this is a very complex situation for big companies and especially for medium and small companies. And I think micro companies will have many problems, especially in the years to come. Thank you. Dr. González, thank you. Now, Patricia Armendariz, welcome. Good morning. And I'm at the beach. That's good. Yeah, we feel a little bit jealous. Well, I want to agree with my colleagues. They have talked about the importance of SMEs in Latin America. And this before giving an answer to your question when it comes to the role of SMEs in face of the current pandemic situation. In Mexico, 90% of Mexican companies, that is, are categorized as companies with fewer than 10 people by company. 500,000 companies, which are already mature, medium companies, and very few big companies. Taking into consideration the information provided by the Ministry of Economy, I would say that this is the same scenario in the whole of Latin America. In Mexico, we have 5 million SMEs, and they're still growing. Despite the pandemic, they are finding places to continue their businesses. And I have to say the following. Energy is a strategic sector. Banking is a strategic sector, but SMEs are also a strategic sector. So we need to have a government policy for them, a policy to coordinate this sector. I work with SMEs ever since 20 years ago. And let me tell you something. We need a joint effort including government policies and the SMEs. I don't quite agree with assistance policies. An entrepreneur needs to succeed by themselves. I don't believe in subsidies. I don't believe in specialized aid. In Mexico, we have got different programs in order to support SMEs, and they have not been successful. The SME sector is so important that if I grow them at 8% per year, and let us forget about scalability, let us forget about the ambitions. With a growth rate of 8% in a systematic fashion, SMEs in Mexico would be the main responsible for the growth that we want to achieve. That's the significance of this SME sector. Talking about this 8%, and now we start with the big human capital problem of SMEs. In order to have this 8% growth rate, we need, or companies need to administrate or manage their risk. If they start working without a plan, then they're going to have peaks of 25%, and then we are going to have very significant drops because they don't know how to manage their growth risks. If a Mexican SME, and this is my experience, I have to say, if a Mexican SME is not really concerned about the management the financial management of the company, well, this is an obstacle. And maybe this is because of education-related problems. It is a lack of focus because our education system doesn't really teach us how to focus on something. So, this has been a source of frustration, especially in a program that is called Shark Tank. I am an investor in this tank. For years, well, I have to wait for years until the SMEs provide their financial statements because they say, I don't understand this, so I'm not going to be concerned about this. How can an SME aspire to have access to sources if they don't know how to express their numbers? And this is not about algebra. This is only about accounting. So we only have 2 points. The state, without transferring financial resources to the SMEs, well, the government can actually participate by training these companies so they can become receiving tanks of credits. SMEs can be these reservoirs also of unemployment, or we can call them innovators. Well, they know what they are facing. They know their segment. By definition, they are entrepreneurs. They know that there is a market niche, that there is an opportunity. The problem is that once they find a differentiated project like Mumps and Pops or whatever, well, the Latin American entrepreneur is rather resilient, very innovative. Then what happens? Without access to financial resources, they won't be able to grow, despite their knowing what they need to grow. There are more fortunate countries, more fortunate than Mexico. In Mexico, the banking system is concentrated in the profits with low effort, like credit cards, like mortgages, car insurance, or car credits. Becoming specialized in credit for SMEs represents a high task. And this is what we need to know. We need to specialize in specific niches. We cannot be experts in every single area of the SME sector. We need to have another state policy, a state policy to incentivize or to encourage the setting up of small financial credits willing to open innovation in instruments that SMEs require. I would say this would be a very good complement, along with the training of SMEs so they can be the reservoirs of this type of credits. If 70%, well, this is the sector that receives 70% of employment. Before the pandemic, as Fernando was mentioning, their condition was not very good. Imagine now with the pandemic. Right now, the consumption patterns have changed. Maybe you were successful in your sector, but now the consumption is going to become rather basic. Consumers are going to concentrate on exportation goods, as the Ministry of Finance has already mentioned. So we can say that this is a very difficult situation and we have to start from scratch. It is not about being reactive. We need to look at SMEs with two hats: training as a state policy and also financing, also as a state policy. Thank you, Dr. Armendariz. And now we have Jorge Arbache, who will finish with the first round of participations. Thank you. I want to thank the participants of this panel. I don't have much to add after listening to all these very important points. I have a couple of points. At least 2.7 million companies in Latin America will have to close down because of the pandemic. It is estimated that most of these companies are SMEs. Because of productivity and credit access problems. After the payment of fiscal obligations and after paying the payroll, the access to credit with the guarantee of the government that many companies had the chance to get and this is going to have an impact on the survival of an important amount of SMEs in the region. And this is a topic that is a source of concern, especially after the second wave of the pandemic. What have we identified in this pandemic area? We have the adoption of new technologies, digitalization in order to reduce costs, in order to have access to the market, and in order to improve productivity. We have also seen a high degree of access to these technologies and the impact that the pandemic can have on SMEs. We have very sophisticated SMEs like the startups in very specific sectors, which have had very good opportunities, very interesting opportunities to progress. But there are many SMEs that haven't had access to those technologies, and they don't have the same ability to continue escalating. Because of this, we're going to have an increase of the gap within the SMEs. What is going to happen because of the pandemic in this business tissue? Number one, companies will have to reduce costs by reducing new technologies. Obviously, this is going to be something very important. It is going to have direct and indirect impacts on the opportunity. Fragile or weak companies will have to leave the market at a higher rate. Number three, the pandemic has accelerated business opportunities in emerging sector, especially in the new supply chains. New companies in the market will have to use new technologies and more advanced business plans. A consequence of this group of factors is that the prototype company that will survive the pandemic will be more productive and will profit from homework and the new technologies. This is something positive when it comes to the pandemic and in the business fabric, especially amongst SMEs. There is a paradox. The pandemic could promote the quantum leap that Latin America needs in order to have a more productive business sector, in order to apply this in a systematic way, we need to have public policies to support more access to technology and training for SMEs. And I am going to talk about this later on during my presentation. Thank you, Dr. Arbace. We have talked about the different challenges that have been created by the pandemic. Now, I want you to elaborate on this final topic, the potential possibilities. The potential possibilities created by this new scenario, how to profit from these opportunities. Is there a specific type of SME that could have a better performance in this field? Because we are talking about the consolidation of digitization. So what is your perspective regarding this new scenario? So we go back to Victoria Hernandez, Ministry of Economy from Costa Rica. The floor is yours. Well, thank you very much. Your participations have been very interesting. Obviously, we have opportunities. We have limited resources. In Costa Rica, we have a very specific current situation. Because of the fiscal debt, and we have been forced to reduce expenses. And whenever we have an expense reduction, we feel like we are limited by the executive, because we cannot really generate these supports that SMEs need. So what is the clear opportunity in this case? And this was mentioned by Patricia. It has to be a state policy. Obviously, we have different policies and different regulations, but this is not enough, Patricia. It is not enough for what I need to do in order to have the impact that I want to create. We have opportunities in order to rethink the industrial area, the industrial sector, because yes, we have got many SMEs. I wouldn't talk about the productivity of these SMEs. Our industrial headcount is very complex, mostly represented by SMEs. In the service area, 60 or 65%, according to the pre-pandemic information. And because of this, the market is rather vulnerable and volatile. So we need to find a more strict perspective in order to find agreements from the higher levels, not only from the perspective of ministries and the different institutions, like the Institution for the Development of Women. We need to rethink what we have in our hands, this articulation and this better use of resources, and a better categorization of the opportunities for banking and entrepreneurial developments. Now, number two, when it comes to the digitization process, we are promoting from the perspective of the central government, we are promoting the digital banking, the fintechs, that is. We are going to concentrate seed capitals in a model like the banks, the banks are not responding to the needs of the business headcount. They always have an excuse. And right now, SMEs do not have the necessary capacity. Many of them are starting from scratch. Many of them want to have access to these resources, and they are reinventing themselves. So they are riding a bicycle and doing something else at the same time. They have to reinvent themselves, and they have to start from scratch, and they need to have access to seed capital, and they want to be innovative and to be part of the digital wave. We have tried and to create specific programs using different sources. And we know that this is not a massive progress. Neobanco is going to help us in this regard because this is going to be an instrument that is going to be fully open, and this is going to be related to the mobile area of the state in order to create a transit to this new lifestyle that will promote the survival of the companies. We have rural credits focusing on small producers. Banks do not like this sector, and we have been forced to create resources by means of other financial institutions, communal groups, association of producers, and chambers of commerce. And we have identified the importance of the tourist section, of the tourist area. We have had a high rate of unemployment because of the problems experienced by the tourist area. So we have been working on digital projects in order to create infrastructure so as to attract people to the country. So we have a very specific political line, and we have profited from our efforts over these 2 years, and we are trying to create laws because we were forced to do so by the pandemic. We needed to react. Otherwise, we were going to have problems increasing the number of companies. And also, we have clusters, especially outside big cities or the different chains. We have different departments or states that do not have the development that they need. We don't have a very good development in terms of coastal and borderline states. So we have been generating these chaining programs. We have been strengthening them. And we have to work on these new business models in order to achieve sustainability. So it's financing, paperwork, accompaniment, the chaining, and the formation of clusters, and the digitalization of all the operations. Thank you. Thank you, Minister. Fernando Turner, the floor is yours. Microphone, please. As the minister says, we have different factors that we have to take into consideration. As Patricia was mentioning, we have to go to the basics. We have to go back to the basics. Right now, we need to find the survival of SMEs. The impact of the crisis is quite big, and this is going to create political and social problems. If we are not businessmen, we should be more empathical towards SMEs. When it comes to SMEs, well, we look at the world. China has been growing at the rate of 8%. And the universe in Mexico is the same. In Korea, Japan, not all companies that we see are big companies. We are talking about small companies with training problems and different types of problems, but they are the ones that promote the development of economies. It is not the big companies. Big companies are not going to solve the unemployment issue. They are not going to create social equality. We need to have the participation and success of SMEs in order to achieve this. What's happening in Mexico and Latin America is quite similar to what's happening in other countries, but we are not very proficient when it comes to our actions. The participation of SMEs is lower if we measure these in a formal way, lower than the productivity of big companies, because they don't have the necessary amount of capital. In Latin America, we have an excess of labor and lack of capital. That's why SMEs require 10,000 additional, well, $10,000 and not $1 million like big companies. And because of this, there is an employment issue. We need to promote public policies. It is not about criticizing entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs are our customer. They pay taxes. They promote the economy. They are the ones working. It is like a joke. The hen is committed, but the pig is concerned about making ham with eggs. So the SMEs are actually working, and we want to help them, but in a different way. But this is not going to be possible. We have to help them whatever it takes. It is not about subsidies and aids. We need policies promoting the elimination of obstacles. I am talking about the government mainly. I am talking about private oligopolies, big companies that do not lend money and that call for very big collaterals. We have to get rid of these obstacles. And there are many analyses about what happens to SME. The UN, the OECD, different institutions have studied this situation. The first problem of SMEs is financing. If we do not work on this issue, along with SMEs, with their current problems, then the SMEs will not make any progress. And our countries will never be able to leave the poverty line. So we have other solutions, and I am talking about the Small Business Administration. The Small Business Administration lends money regardless of the problems, and they train very well. Many materials are in Spanish. We should be able to download this information. They defend the SMEs, and they defend the SMEs at the executive level. We don't have that. We don't have financing because governments want to protect the banking system. In order to avoid risks, in order to avoid problems in the system, the financing of government is non-existent. NAFINSA, many years ago, was an element to support SMEs. We don't even have that now.
We do not know how to render a service. It depends on our business. Let's say we're giving a service to a complicated customer, but we need to sell. Simplification. It is obvious that in the mind of legislators and in the mind of executives, nor in anybody's mind, do they have the fact that a health fiscal code or the creation of companies, a small and medium enterprise. Well, owners are everything. They are the production director, finance director, commercial director, human resources director, promoter, manager. They are everything, and their time is extremely valuable. Thus, we do not take care of that, and we establish the same regulations to a small and a large enterprise. technology. One of the big tragedies occurring in Mexico is basically the change in attitude of CONACYT. The way it is, it would be better to disappear it. They simply do not have the functions for which it was created, and we have to disappear it. However, CONACYT is very important in terms of public policies to support technology. They are necessary. How can we understand that all countries do this, and we cannot stop to think of whether it is necessary or not, and simply to copy those that are successful and apply what they have done based on this, and not to tropicalize this too much, because this stays short. I think that we have to reach a conclusion based on this dialogue so that it brings some good results. So that in order, we have to try to create an entity similar to the Small Business Administration. We can copy Canadians or Japanese or many others that have very similar things. And we should apply that to Mexico. It's already there. It is existent. It does not need too many tax resources. It needs to provide guarantees to move financial instruments. No subsidies. It only requires intelligent actions by persons who are able to produce smart solutions and that are not producing them. In the meantime, we're all living from the taxes of small and medium enterprises. I think that we should try to focus and attempt to have these things, to professionalize these things. Like we said, this is something we do more spontaneously, which is characteristic of us. And this is something that small and medium enterprises know better than anybody, not officials or people dealing with strategies. We must eliminate bureaucracy in this sense, and we must listen to small and medium entrepreneurs. They are the owners. We are addressing them. We are focusing this decision on them. The purpose is to serve these persons. We don't want them to be like us. My suggestion would be to focus on the creation of something like the Small Business Administration. And it has been something that we have been promoting for years. Unfortunately, what we have seen is that officials come and go at the institutes that, in quotations, have to support companies. They become bureaucratic, they spend money for nothing. And I think that, again, this time, at least in Mexico, this is happening again. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Turner. We will continue with Francisco Gonzalez. Thank you very much. I agree with all of the speakers that have spoken before me with regards to the crisis. The panel is reactivation and jumping to a new economy. How, or the impact on regional SMEs. I'd like to mention 5 things. These are world trends after COVID that we will be experiencing. And I'd like to take advantage at the same time for this. One of them is e-commerce. E-commerce has been state of the art. Its penetration, it takes several years of adoption, and we find some advantages. Technification of SMEs involves some complexities, but I also see this as an opportunity. I think that the government and chambers must be or should be providing support in order for them to follow this path. This lowers costs. It is also a channel that has an impact. It ties large ones and small ones because they are following once, or they are on one same floor initially, one same platform, and anybody can access it by means of sales at any shop. Second, this is the diversification of suppliers. These supply chains will attempt to depend less on one country in order to become more efficient and to lower risk. Diversification of vendors can enable many small companies and medium-sized companies to link themselves to other companies that were procuring in other countries. These companies are looking for diversification in order to have less problems in the event of a different type of pandemic, etc., for different reasons. Location. Location plays a very important role as well. Companies have started to look for facilities that are close to where they manufacture in order to have inventory quickly. And location has effects for workers as well. Home office or distance work, seminars like this, and it provides a series of advantages for the new economy. This is a third trend that should be taken advantage of. Regionalization, we have named it several times. This is a new trend for the national supply chain, and this is to have access to reshoring and nearshoring in some sectors like IT, medical devices, pharmaceutical matters. I'd like to touch upon this by giving an example. This is the case of the Jalisco Technological Consortium. These are companies, SMEs or MSMEs, with 2 to 10 workers that develop software, and they provide offers and partner when they have to prepare a solution in order to prepare some type of development. But they don't have the programmers like larger companies. So these companies get together to submit a project, and they have been able to make progress in Latin America and also in US and Canada. This is important, and getting MSMEs together is very important. And the fifth factor is sustainability. It was already mentioned by Minister Hernandez. Sustainability. Businesses have to be more sustainable. Investments in infrastructure have to be more sustainable as well in all senses. And this will enable SMEs and MSMEs to have better possibilities for growth. And the most important factor in this recovery stage, well, some say that hotel businesses lease rooms. They can become small SMEs. Others have had the possibility to do their own small distribution model by means of platforms that enable them to achieve this. So this situation of world or global trends after COVID, e-commerce, diversification of vendors, third, location, fourth, regionalization, and fifth, sustainability and conversion. I think that they mark opportunities and possibilities as long as they get support in education and as long as there are support of associations, chambers, universities, and government. This is what I see in terms of the reactivation of SMEs. Thank you so much. We will continue our conversation with Patricia Armendariz. Thank you so much. First of all, I'd like to talk about the private sector's view about the fact that a state policy is not necessarily a policy that involves public spending, an important public spending, especially at times like this. We can, I think, use training platforms that are not necessarily very expensive for very basic things. I personally, privately, am using artificial intelligence tools in order to answer typical questions by SMEs. And this is relatively inexpensive, especially as a percentage of a national or government spending. Another thing is that in terms of financing, and I have placed a lot of emphasis there, the state does not need, and the state should not provide seed capital, no preferential interest rates. Business people we are not persons who we're not handicapped. We need protection. We business people need wings in order to fly. We need opportunities to fly. And I place emphasis on training and financing. But private financing at competitive market rates. If the state accompanies us, I think that it could maybe refer to the establishment of incentives for a popular bank, private bank, not by the government, not development bank, because many countries have proven that development banks are very limited compared to the strength of private banking. So a social banking, like the one that we have attempted to have in Mexico by means of popular financial institutions that are able to manage resources and that start to become involved in smart niches, such as small and medium financial companies. That's something I'd like to add to the comment by Minister Victoria. The other important part that deals with the question that was asked basically refers to the opportunities that we see in the future. I fully agree with Francisco. He very specifically explained where opportunities lie. And this is a hypothesis and more than a trend, or rather, more than a clear trend that I see, it is a possibility which is occurring, and this is something that will be affecting the world. I think that this type of crisis that has become a part of the economic crisis family can occur often in the future, or there are probabilities that it will be occurring often in the future. And if you notice, the countries that had a hardest drop in their GDP were the countries that insisted more in consuming more things that were not necessary. In the US, 10% drop in their GDP and a very, very expensive recovery. Who knows whether they will achieve it, considering the amount of debt, fiscal debt that they engaged in. This is one of the most important countries, and they created consumer needs that are not necessary. And this pandemic has shown us all that we can live not only well, but better if we have a more basic consumption. I think that consumers have learned our lesson, and thus we are saving more. There are more savings, at least in Mexico. The trend is that people are afraid. I don't know what will happen. I'll stop buying, or I'll stop traveling to this and that. I prefer to go back to basics. I think this is a trend that is here to stay. More so because we will be more familiar with the very little predictability in this pandemic that can remain more permanently in an uncertainty environment. So I think that there will be possibilities to greater investments at competitive rates. And I think that an opportunity for entrepreneurs, in addition to what Francisco has said, refers to going back to basic consumption, going to consuming more healthy things, more basic things. But this pandemic has also shown how vulnerable we are if we do not take care of our health. The health sector, as Francisco has mentioned, is an important sector. It is an opportunity area, but the basic sector of organic food, basic food, of food that supports human beings, I think will be an area of opportunity that is very important for consumers and micro entrepreneurs. Another thing that I'd like to mention in terms of regionalism that Francisco referred to is the possibility to integrate productive vertical value chains. Mexicans forget that there is an important market in the competitiveness systems, in the relative competitiveness systems in terms of costs of labor towards the South. We forget about that. We're always looking up to the north with our rich brother that will be buying, and we never see that Latin America has a very important capacity given the cultural cohesion of becoming a market of vertical supply. I agree with Francisco. Regionalism, or at least regionalization at the level of this trend, well, is here to stay for a while. We no longer trust our Asian neighbor because the Asian neighbor could engage in a pandemic as well, but we prefer to our better known neighbors. The United States is, well, it will turn to see us because rules of origin are more difficult in USMCA. And if I think about telling the United States as a small or medium enterprise, oh, I have to stop importing from China the plastic edges or corners that you used to produce, and with absolute inertia, a lack of our ability to innovate. Why did we get used to import everything from Asia? So I tell them, in order to produce locally, regionally, I need to produce these plastic angles. Fund me, become my resource provider, and I will be your supplier of materials. So if we were able to verticalize this gradually, which is very important, I think that it would be a very important opportunity given to us by this pandemic. And the other part, and I am convinced that it could become an important area for micro entrepreneurs, is of products for leisure time. I think that I am no exception. I think I've become a lot more productive. My day ends at 4 p.m. I used to end it previously at 9 p.m. because I had to travel to another place and I had to deal with appointments in the office. But from 4 and on, I have nothing else to do. I think that these are things that generate some sort of renaissance that gives us more productivity. This is something given to us by COVID, so this is another area of opportunity. Thank you very much. Thank you, Patricia Armendariz, Jorge Arbache, for this to close the second round, and because we are stretching our time, we have after that a general question for all. So, Jorge Arbache. A fact is that we won't have more of the same. We've seen many important changes. Changes in terms of consumer preferences, in family consumption, and there are some matters related to the environment and to other things. There is a very important trend on increasing the consumption of services. And of course, this has changed notoriously. In terms of specific areas, where do I find opportunities? There are opportunities lying in many areas, of course, but I think that we should look beyond e-commerce, which I believe is more than reasonable. There are opportunities in the health services, education services, welfare services, payment services, financial services, logistics, and others. Mention was made of the inclusion of new technologies as an important step for SMEs in the region. And I think that this is more reasonable. And I think that, well, this is clear. We have to take into account that new technologies, digital technologies, and the inclusion of artificial intelligence in many areas, we must bear in mind that they are more commoditized technologies. They are technologies that have steps that are, prices that are dropping over time. Access is larger for a larger set of SMEs all over the world, and not only here. And at the end of the day, these technologies, in marginal terms, will not necessarily, well, it will increase productivity of companies in order to survive being more competitive in a world where intangible matters are gaining more importance in terms of international trade and foreign investments, where tons of things are done in digital platforms. So it will be necessary to consider topics that were already there, such as training in high quality managerial management and access. There are some important tools. Innovation. Innovation is also a key topic, especially in terms of intangible things. Access to credit, access to talent, internationalization, and others. I think that this is a combination of conventional things and non-conventional things in view of this deep change in the economy in terms of what consumers are looking for. SMEs must adopt, looking towards the future, to see how they can survive in this changing, extremely changing context. The ability to innovate in their products or services, business models, management models, has to be very clear for investors. Thank you. Thank you very much. We have very little time left. In order to continue with the next roundtables, I'd like to ask a question to you, and I'd like you to please make an effort to summarize a fundamental action, in your opinion, a key action from your different positions that should be implemented in the short term in order to face the challenges in the SME market. Thank you. Victoria Hernandez. I don't know if she's connected. Yes, she is. A specific measure. Minister, can you hear us? I believe your microphone must be off. I was saying that I was thinking about a specific action. It's very hard. I agree with Patricia in many senses, but as a state, we must generate a policy. From my position, I think that the most important challenge that we face as a state minister, we believe that we are establishing a policy and generating incentives and promoting and generating conditions for the micro business community to work in the country. So if they're going to become diversified, if they will have access to funding sources, you must be well aware, as Patricia has said, that banks are not interested. So we have to find alternatives. And this is important because it says if I have money, then I cannot if I don't have money, I cannot move my company forward. Or people think that a micro company will always be small, but this should not be the issue on which we act. I think if I had to give priority, it's always hard to separate resources And maybe I did not make myself clear. I'm not talking about special resources, but SMEs or the micro entrepreneurial sector cannot work under the regulations of a banking system. Banks are concerned, consumer banks are concerned, and they're not interested in productive banks. This is why, as long as we don't leave this old paradigm, I would resort to development banking, and we have to operate. And this is more or less like at times of colonial times. I give you coffee, and in exchange, you will give me rice. So people should get guarantees for their production because people do not have this payment capacity. It is very important to strengthen micro companies because this generates equality in wealth distribution. But concerning all of the paradigms brought by the pandemic, I think that it is essential to consolidate. And I agree with Mr. Fernando. I do like the programs where these companies are accompanied by someone. This is why I don't think, well, that I think that this has been on a timely fashion. We can facilitate, but if there are 900 women in a webinar, and maybe only 10 will be taking something that will be useful for their homes or businesses. I think that one of the specific goals is to consolidate these business sectors, business advisory services. And I think that these are a plus. They are contextualized, and small companies check their questions in terms of technology or finances or trade. And that is where the sources of funding should be operating on very specific topics. They have to become quick sources with a good response capacity that will support the survival of that company, as you have mentioned earlier. Today, we are not here to work on growth, but on survival. And yes, they feel disoriented, somewhat lost, and they find a big level of uncertainty, and this detaches them from this in their business. So maybe in terms of the simplicity that I am expressing, I would keep the strengthening of business support centers in the country, and I would focus on companies maybe headed by women, basically.
Ministra, Fernando.
Thank you, Minister. And now, Mr. Turner. And I am sorry to say that we haven't got much time left. So please try to be brave. Well, I understand this. I'm going to highlight my suggestion. The implementation of the small business administration model in our Latin American countries. I think this is something easy to do. We represent the stakeholders. We can open the internet and we can click on a button and we can register. This is something evident. Our company started with 500 square meters, and now we have offices in 10 countries of the world. We operate in different countries. In every country, but in Mexico, there is an inefficient support system for SMEs. My impression is that we are still looking to invent the wheel. The wheel has been invented. Now we need to apply it. What is the point of thinking about the requirements? The requirements are rather clear. So we need to leave these perspective and apply what's proven to work. That's my recommendation. Thank you. And now Francisco Gonzalez. Thank you. I will try to be brief. We need to support and accompany SMEs so they can have a solid infrastructure, so they can have access to further trade, further financing by means of companies that work in this field. So my keyword is digitalization. We need to learn about this. We need to develop the measures. So it's all about digitization of the SMEs. Thank you, Dr. Gonzalez. Now, Patricia Armendariz. I do believe that at the regional level, we have had different initiatives, both government and private. Latin American entrepreneurs need to find sources of information so as to show SMEs where the opportunities lay. We have opportunities everywhere. This is going to be a very dynamic environment. The business sector would have to communicate these opportunities to the SMEs. On behalf of the government, I will do the same to find ways of connecting suppliers to customers. Finding ways of informing the SMEs. Thank you. Jorge Arbache now. And with this, we finish. What really matters is to create the necessary conditions so SMEs can have access to assets, value-added assets. You ask me to give you a specific action. I would say it's training in order to manage SMEs and training for the officials. Thank you to the members of the panel for sharing this information with us. Information about the challenges and the impact that has resulted because of the crisis in Latin America. Thank you very much. I want to thank the members of this first panel for this very interesting discussion. You can participate in this conversation using the hashtag CAFPYME, and you can follow us using @AgendaCA.
Continuamos la jornada del día de hoy con la segunda sesión titulada
And we continue with the second panel, Trends in the Global Value Chains, Challenges and Opportunities for Regional SMEs. And now we have Lucero Alvarez from Financiero TV, and she will be moderating this session. Good morning, and thank you very much for being here, and thank you very much for inviting me to participate in today's conference, CAF 2020. And today we are going to be talking about the trends in global value chains, challenges and opportunities for SMEs in the region. And we have with us Amelia Santos Paulino, Head of Investment Research at the Investment Division at UNCTAD. Welcome, Amelia. We also have with us Álvaro Echeverría, Executive Vice President of the Commerce Chamber, Chile, Asia Pacific. Thank you very much for being here with us. Sandra Aragonés, Vice President of the National Council of Logistics in Mexico. Sandra, it's good to have you here. And we also have Adriana Moreno, Director of Digital Transformation at Nissan Motor Corporation. Adriana, welcome. So we're going to start with this very important subject, one of the most impacted sectors during the pandemic and during the economic sector. Well, we are talking about the SMEs in the region. We had to confine ourselves during the first part of the year, and many supply chains were broken. So, Amelia, what do you think about the response in face of the sanitary emergency in the supply chains? We are talking about technology, we are talking about organizations and information, so goods would reach the final consumer in Latin America. What do you think about the reaction of these supply chains? Thank you, Lucero. Before starting about the impact on the supply chain, it is important to talk about the impact on investments. We know that the foreign investment is the main source of capital for producing and developing the productivity of countries. So first, we had the decrease of this direct foreign investment in the region. The context. We had an impact on supply and demand, and the panorama now is rather uncertain. Apart from the pandemic effects, we'll have economic effects in the medium and long run. I would like to highlight one aspect. It is not only about the financial element, it is also about the investment in productive sectors in the region. Latin American countries were mainly affected because of the closing down of these investment and infrastructure projects, and this has had a medium and long-term impact for companies in general. In general, with the exception of Mexico and Chile, we have seen a decrease of 25% when it comes to the flow of investment to the region. And this has had an impact on specific industries like telecommunications, the oil industry, and also the production of renewable energy and mining. So this is a complex perspective. This has an impact on infrastructure projects in the region. In terms of microeconomic development, some countries have had problems even before the pandemic, like Argentina. But this has been a problem that has affected both supply and demand. I will talk about the supply chain, but I want to highlight the impact on investment and infrastructure projects. In economies like in Chile and Mexico, we were able to face the global shock because of different elements, like the increase of the flow towards the manufacturing sector in Chile. The car industry, the spare part industry, profit from the development of electronics and machinery. And we also have acquisitions by Mexican building companies, and because of this, the impact was not as negative as in other countries in the region. For instance, in the Caribbean, the foreign investment went down by 30%, almost 30%, and we have contraction of the economy. So we have a complex perspective that affects different types of investment and industries. And later on, I will talk about the supply chain. We know that there are some factors like investment and consumption are important for the recovery of the region. Alvaro, what do you think? What are the challenges and opportunities for the value chains? We can see the impact because of the pandemic, because of the lockdown. Would it be necessary to relocate some of these industries? As Amelia was mentioning, and as it was mentioned previously, we need to find new tools in order to promote the development of societies. Before the pandemic, we had a devaluation of the idea of creating factories and promoting the development of the value chain and the productivity capacity because of the logistic issue, because of the products and services. This was affected by 45% according to our statistical information. At the end, we closed down borders, we closed down factories, we had a reduction of sales, we had a reduction of investments. And because of these, we have a new situation in the market. And this has affected the value chains globally. We have a new scenario in front of us. But it is very important, and I am not going to give you a diagnosis, but it is necessary to see what can be done in order to solve the situation of SMEs, what SMEs need in order to continue their growth. In the previous panel, someone mentioned in terms of investment, we need to have an executive ministry in order to follow up on processes. In foreign trade, we know that this goes beyond national governments. So we need to define common policies between the public and private sector in order to define what we need to do, because we are not talking about short-term investments. So we needed to define clear rules. We needed to define the roles of each of the countries. We have countries that supply, we have countries that manufacture, we have countries that consume services. We need to define these roles in a strategic way. In Latin America, it is very difficult to do this. And normally, we are reactive, not really. And also individualism. It is very difficult to develop teamwork in Latin America. The pandemic, the current situation, is forcing us to look for this solidarity. For that, we need to develop a trust. And this is going to play a fundamental role, regardless of the platform or the tool that we decided to use. As it was mentioned previously, we don't need, or entrepreneurs do not need subsidies. What they need are clear policies. They need to have a medium or long run vision in that context. We have to play a very important role along with the other stakeholders. So if you allow me, if we have all these basic conditions, we would be able to seed and really promote the value of value chains in order to promote more products in face of the new conditions of the market. I would say this is the most specific topic. Define what we needed to do in order to promote the performance of SMEs. You were asking about what the SMEs need. They need to adapt. They need to adapt to technology. During the lockdown, we had to adapt to the use of new technologies at home because of home office or because of different education platforms that we are now using. We had to learn about these technological tools. The same happened in many companies, not only in Mexico, even SMEs had to adapt in order to continue being competitive. Sandra, taking into consideration technology, can you tell me what is the importance of the implementation of new technologies in these processes in order to take goods to the final consumer? Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for the invitation. I would say new technologies are very important in order to be at the front line in a world where the consumer is changing. We are facing a new normality. Internet of Things, blockchains, drones. This is all becoming a reality. I think the pandemic has shown us that the digital era is not as far as we thought it was. It is now a reality. We have global chains, and these global chains need to be resilient and flexible. This is what the market is looking for. The SMEs need to have the support of these technologies. We have a new channel with a high growth e-commerce. What is the channel that the SMEs can use in order to profit from this new technology and so they can reach new consumers, because the new consumers are looking for products by means of a network allowing them to have sustainable access to these products. So we need to leverage these processes with the use of new technologies. This is going to allow us to be more productive. In the previous panel, it was mentioned that one of the challenges of SMEs is the productivity versus big companies. SMEs have got productivities that are 7 or 8 times lower than that of big companies, and this can be improved by means of the use of technologies. These technologies can be accessible by many markets now. In the past, they were very expensive, but because of the automation process, we can actually use those activities in order to perform manual activities. SMEs can also use these systems in the cloud, because these systems are available to them. They can even have controls, they can monitor processes, they can track people, they can be sure that they have a balance. This is a balance that we always want to achieve, a balance between the level of service in order to attract our consumers at a lower cost, so as to be competitive in a reality where we face more difficult situations. The loyalty of consumers is going down. There are many available products, not only in local markets, but also through big companies. So the brands or the new brands are not having the same growth than older brands. So this is a good opportunity for entrepreneurs. We need to enter these markets by using technology, by using analytics. Thank you, Adriana. What do you think about the technical transformation in the supply chain, specifically from the perspective of SMEs? When we use technology, we always talk about digitalization, and we think of it as very expensive. Is it really very, very expensive? How much does it cost to implement this technology, and what are the benefits? We need to remember the efforts that we have implemented in different industries. the new director of the new driver in the technology development has been COVID-19. We are now concentrating on technology used in different chains, the way we connect with customers. Digitalization is now part of our daily lives. When we talk about opportunities and challenges, it is important to understand the meaning of a deep digitalization process. It is about talking about a new economic and productive system with new players. Yes, we had a conversation with these new players, but we were not interested in understanding how we could work together. These new laws are forcing us to innovate, and this calls for the transformation of business structures, the way we manage the company and the ways of leading the company. In order to have digitalization, we need to have people, processes, and technology. And this is a big challenge because we're not only talking about changing the mindset, it is also about the implementation with the final customer in Mexico. Well, Mexico has a fundamental role in the sector. We are #1 in Latin America and #6 globally. The sector generates more than 1 million direct jobs. When we talk about these figures, we're talking about 1 million people working in a way that we have been using for 25 years. Talking about digitalization overnight, it's not easy. It's not something that we have within us. So one of the many challenges is that when we talk about digitalization and actual digitalization, we're not talking about everyone, only a few. We need to have very broad conversations about connectivity, infrastructure, not only in terms of the organization, but also from the perspective of the country. And we are talking about public policies that didn't exist in many countries. We are still talking about the spectrum, the implementation, the way we are going to create this new reality or connectivity. But this new connectivity is a must for these technologies to work in the right way. That is to say, the digital transformation is not only bits and bytes. It is about facing the change of processes and tools, so our industries develop the right scope in this intelligent and digital environment with a perspective or with a center in the customer. In order to have a new coherence of the physical and digital elements. Right now, we face a consumer that is buying digitally, but we also have SMEs and big companies that were not ready in order to promote their products in this way, to give the products to the customer. So, we have a long way ahead of us. We need to be aware of the complete ecosystem and the development of skills with an internal driver, technology. And I think this is one of the most important challenges in the world and in Latin America. The digital transformation is an important element. It is one of the elements of investment in Latin America for the following years. This is a question for Amelia. You started by talking about investment. I think this is something relevant for the whole of the region. Where does Latin America need to invest in the following years after the pandemic? Thank you, Lucero. The previous members of the panel talked about something very important, the structural change that we are witnessing in the production of goods. It is not only about COVID-19. We are facing a new industrial revolution, and countries were not ready for this revolution. So we have to think about our competitive advantages. And these advantages are going to encounter the current situation. The current situation had an impact in different industries with different competitive advantages. So we have to think how our production systems can become more resilient at a national level. But also we have to think about how to face diversity at a national level and at a regional level using policies. The report on investment published during the pandemic, we mentioned that we are at a breaking point in terms of global production and supply chains. So there are 2 points from the perspective of the policies. How to improve the resilience of companies and how to be part of more resilient value chains. The second topic, how to increase the level of autonomy at a national level and how to increase the production capacity in this new context. So we have a productivity and we also have the progress in the medium and long term. And we have 4 paths ahead of us. And this is something that we are going to develop in different ways depending on the industry. These pathways, and I want to thank Sandra and Adriana because they mentioned technology and the digitization. Well, these are 4 pathways will depend on these elements, but also on the standards pertaining to the social impact of this new reality. And apart from this, we have the differences between regions and countries when it comes to the social objectives and the environmental standards. This is something that we cannot forget when developing or when thinking about the diversification of capacities and also investment. So we have 4 pathways for companies in the region. Number 1, localization. This is going to be a must. During the crisis, many companies and many multinationals, well, after the crisis, they will have to go back to their countries, and we have a higher concentration of the added value. So from the perspective of policies, we needed to define how we are going to improve the capacities in order to increase the added value. This is what the first pathway. The second one is diversification. In order to promote the distribution of the economic activity. We know that some countries have specific geographical features, so they specialize in basic resources, mining, renewable resources. Some others concentrate on services and some others in manufacturing. But the question is, how can we diversify ourselves within our capacities? There are many opportunities in terms of investment. We can participate in these global chains, but this is going to call for high-level infrastructure, not only in physical terms, but also from the perspective of digital technologies. This is something that governments need to take into consideration, and also banks, development banks, how to improve the digital infrastructure physically and digitally in order to promote diversity, not only in terms of production, but also in terms of exports and imports. Another element where we have opportunities in Latin America, regionalization. We think there will be an expansion of the value chains, and in this regard, technology will play an important role. The reduction of steps. And we see opportunities in terms of the geographical distribution of value chains. We see that this pathway is going to affect companies that work in the transformation at a national and international level, and also the primary sector. This is not only affecting government, but also the private sector. Within this regionalization and diversification context, we have identified a trend towards regional financing, regional investment that focuses on efficiency. The policy makers and the different ministers needed to assess this situation. We see a movement towards a higher efficiency and a higher ROI. And maybe we can also be part of bigger industrial groups. So cooperation, economic regional cooperation is going to be a key factor, and the CAF plays a very important role in terms of industrial policies and the promotion of investments. These are two elements that go hand in hand, and we cannot look at them separately. This is a very important pathway for Latin American countries. And finally, diversification. This has an impact on high knowledge and high technology companies. This pathway is going to create shorter value chains, and it is going to regroup the different production stages. We're going to have an impact on different countries, especially if they don't have an industrial policy allowing them to absorb this type of high knowledge activities. For instance, in the health area, we are talking about medicines. These industries need investment and innovation. And cooperation when it comes knowledge-related cooperation. So we have four pathways. We have got many challenges and obstacles in terms of policies. But all the factors will play a very important role, including the private sector. How to have a policy, how to have an investment policy in order to promote sustainable development, taking into consideration technology, environment, and the social impact. I encourage you to continue the discussion on the development of private and public policies that are coherent, policies that do not only concentrate on the physical infrastructure, but also those elements that affect SMEs. At the end, I will talk about recommendations in terms of policies, but now I give the floor to the other members of the panel. My takeaway is that we have four potential pathways, and Latin America can profit from diversification and regionalization to bring SMEs into the value chains.
And this recommendation is what Amelia told us for SMEs and also for multinational companies. Amelia was mentioning something interesting, economic regional cooperation. Alvaro, how have you seen in the last few months the regional integration? How did countries respond in Latin America as a whole? How did we help each other? What opportunities is this complicated situation in 2020 giving us? The answer is not easy. The problem is that since governments are changing, the structure changes, people change, And in the end, it is not that easy to have a more open dialogue. However, we could say that in terms specifically of COVID-19 and the teams that, or the equipment that came from China, it worked quite well. And these were actions that were never undertaken previously. South American companies that had to fly directly to Asia to bring in face masks and to use air bridges that were not considered previously. Some governments also had the possibility to export supplies to other countries. So I'd say that cooperation at this time concerning the crisis, it worked. But what will happen after the crisis? We won't go back to the former practices that affect what I said earlier, individualism. So we have to have something that is not as populist. And about what Amelia said, in the end, the political topic is extremely important. You have to have political decisions in order to do things and not to be opportunistic, because SMEs encompass everything. But what is done is not that practical. I think that nowadays in Latin America, well, we feel very optimistic. This is a huge market, prosperous market with many possibilities, but we have to unite it to generate spaces of trust. We have to have instruments and things that will help us. And in this context, I'd like to thank CAF for the initiative. We here are also doing this. This is what entrepreneurs need. It needs to have clear and accurate signs, and its nature is necessary, and they will be creating productivity and all the things necessary. What we need is some specific tools for some specific areas. Imagine what Diana has mentioned. What we did not learn in 10 years, we learned in 2 months. Amazing. And nowadays, these new practices are saving time. And, well, we should not lose sight of the human relationship in that context. I'd like to mention something different. It is important because in the end, the ones that are doing this are persons, so we have to have some things in presence and then follow up on all the virtual systems and online systems in the world. In that context, I think that we are setting the basis, and we have to see the role that each one of the countries can play. I think that we are following some strategic actions in each one of the countries. So the case of Bolivia, it has trade between Atlantic and Pacific. And in Mexico, well, it could be connectivity between North America and South America. It can also promote not only import and exports, but also re-exporting. There are many factors on which we could be working in the consumer market. Most of the products are helping us, and consumption centers where we can take products that are ready to be delivered in containers, and then we could distribute in boxes in smaller units. So I think that this is something that SMEs could do with their own brands by looking for global value chains. There are many business forms that could be used, but we need to have a clear diagnosis, and we must establish this cooperation and also establish the rules of the game. And it is in that context where we have to see things. I could also give some specific things. This is what people are expecting from authorities, so that all these things are a reality, and so that we are not only left with a good political speech in terms of how to help SMEs, and it will be benefiting only some large companies, not related to us, but I hope that clusters will be made with the rest of the SME companies. But if we want to attempt a more significant development, global development that is more comprehensive, where all the regions are taking part, I think that in that case we should establish policies that are more in accordance with what the world is currently demanding. Regional integration, we need to reinforce it all over Latin America. I was also reading some important data for Mexico. According to estimates, for every day the value chain with China, Korea, and Japan was interrupted due to lockdown this year, $4 million were affected in the value of Mexican exports. Sandra, what do you think about this? How much are SMEs taking part in these value chains that we have talked about? An important thing is that one of the important things for the growth of SMEs is how global value chains are integrated. Second, Mexico in 2019, well, we talked about 95% of SMEs not being integrated. And we compare this to matters of how much the products that are sold are representing in developed countries that come from SMEs. This is about 40%. In the case of countries that are developing, only 8 to 10%. So this is an area of opportunity in order to work with these global value chains. And as Amelia said, there is evidence where we will be having to regionalize more and more. We will have to change vendors because COVID brought with it many teachings. We have vendors or a more diversified foundation of vendors. We're also having support in the domestic or local market that will enable us to mitigate these matters related to COVID, where people in charge of logistics and of the supply chain have to find alternatives. And these will not only involve an increase in inventories, we have to look for different suppliers. It also leads to innovation, to alternatives, to additional components, to finding options for cooperation with the industry in a more robust system, such as for schools and academicians and teachers that will help us find solutions in order to find efficiencies throughout this chain. And this has also shown us in this supply chain that there is a very strong execution ability. Even though we were facing those huge challenges with closed borders, with a changing world in a digital era, and these requirements were more important, more palpable. And this leads us to say that talent-related matters, human capital-related matters in this digital transformation go beyond bits. It involves processes, and it is very important to develop new competencies in the persons that are in charge of the supply chain. These competencies go beyond soft skills. We need more human types of leadership and a chain that has changed the way we work. It has brought about some emotional consequences as well for our consumers and our workers. We need more human competencies and competencies where we talk about technology, where the people in charge are capable of knowing what certifications are necessary in order to be part of a global supply chain. What requirements do I need consumers to have now in order to say that my products do not have an impact on carbon, or trying to establish logistics so in order to have innovative packaging. So all those types of things are also key in order to have these types of functions and to change the way in which we are operating. The mindset in the supply chain goes beyond globalization and beyond service, beyond inventories. It considers things like, how do I give trust to consumers? How do I deliver, how can I give certainty to consumers that I can follow some health and sanitation standards in a situation where health is at risk? So I should be considering these types of things. But the person in charge of the supply chain must also have that holistic vision, not only concerning technical matters, as I mentioned earlier, but also concerning financial matters, investments, ecosystem, etc. And that way, in order to be able to mitigate the situations that we will be facing in this pandemic, we will continue to learn many more things, because this is a new way of doing things and of seeing our daily lives in a very different way, different from some months ago. The federal government, some weeks before, was launching a program or project that would provide support to business women who owned or who were in charge of a small or medium enterprise. I read that one of the requirements for this program was to have some experience in experts, and not just any company has knowledge on any of these processes. Adriana, what is the benefit for investors in terms of planning and digitizing supply chains? We were talking to someone this week, and they said that we could lower costs in between 30 to 50%. Would this be possible? This is the time to reactivate things. When you think about the end scenario, when you have gone through all of these transformations, yes, of course, there will be some efficiencies. But it is of essence, I think, to keep focused in terms of generating new value proposals for users, clients, is the driver of this path we are following now. And it is very important to keep an agile constant in order to turn technology into an ally, in order to innovate things that Latin America needs. I'd have to mention something that is very important that Amelia mentioned: diversification as an added value in improving value chains. And Alvaro's comment is also important here. It is necessary to look at the productive chain that is necessary based on the new rules of the game. And Lucero, I think that I would try to answer for an infrastructure to have the ability to adapt and to generate the necessary automation in order to have important impacts on economic matters. It is necessary to be very aware of the public and private system and the convergence that is required, as well as the needs for change, and what you internally will need to have in terms of change management or people adaptability, so that they occur, as Sandra has said, so that the necessary competencies are there, so that everything will work holistically and comprehensively. I think that the word we need to add to the things that we're experiencing is comprehensive omni-channel. And this will be generating these results of economic efficiencies different from what we have seen before. We have to talk about intelligent or smart connectivity. And all these transformation and technology matters should become a part of the DNA of the product and of the business model, where we all understand the key competencies and the values that we have to use for technology such as cloud and all of the structures and architectures that these teams can provide us in terms of security and protection. I have to be very honest and say that that's where we have an opportunity. Before thinking about the end outcome, I think that our approach should be based on understanding very well what we need to do within and the support that is necessary in this government ecosystem, so that this can occur in all of the enterprise sizes in this set. The programs that governments are generating now, you said, ask for very specific capacities, and I'd say that This is a big challenge because, yes, you need them in order to take advantage of these. But it is something that we saw a year ago in 2, 3, or 5 years, but we are now experiencing it. We need to be in a new mobility based on this knowledge technology. Amelia, which ones do you think are the main challenges for the international production system, considering that the beginning of a change and a transformation requires investment on that change, and to avoid, of course, affecting consumers in the beginning? Thank you, Lucero. This is a very important question. There are many challenges. Not only now, we have faced many challenges during this decade, the transformation decade towards the millennium change and the post-COVID reality. This will, of course, involve capital repatriation and also important policies, commercial matters, and costs that have increased during the pandemic. And this has led to a reduction in the reinvestment of earnings by many of these companies that are linked not only to the region, but also to the productive system. The behavior of multinational companies and the response of multinational companies to the pandemic, to the crisis, has affected the value chain in the short term, and this will affect us in the medium and long run, especially when it comes to repatriation of benefits and investments being sent to other areas. This is something that we are experiencing in Asia and also in Latin America. Another challenge that is important is that a smaller proportion of investments aim at efficiency, and what they are aiming at is specific markets. So there will be stronger competition between the countries for a limited number of investments, since, like I mentioned earlier, other forms of investment, such as acquisitions, mergers, and investments, have been affected. This is thus an important challenge. And this will have an impact on the location of investments and on how countries can attempt to increase their response and productive capacity in order to compete here. But there are other things, like I said earlier, the digital platforms and distributed manufacturing. This leads to countries to find other avenues to be part of the value chains. And they can also introduce new applications and new services in these productive services, enabling us to improve access to the regional and other value chains. So digital platforms are a good opportunity for the countries in terms of more competition in a value chain market. However, in order to face challenges and take advantage of these opportunities, we have to change the paradigm for investment and development, a paradigm of the public sector, private sector, and partnerships between them. What we propose is to try to see in which segments we can increase efficiency. What we call the export world, a more regional export, and a larger or broader export base. We have to change the paradigm, a broader paradigm where trade policies and industrial policies and investment policies are occurring together. This also implies flexibility of the productive sector, of the government, to adjust policies to unexpected changes. Also for SMEs, it is important to think that diversification is not only to produce more goods, more services. but also to look at the focus of investors regarding large-scale projects in order to consider manufacturing clusters and other clusters, and countries in Africa where they have seen many positive benefits. These are countries that do not have the national ability to develop local companies. So clusters at the country and regional level have been able to promote and foster bringing in investment and establishing the foundations for a manufacturing local process. So in terms of industrial processes and small-scale manufacturing, it is important in this context as well. For sure, the 4 paths that I mentioned before of value chains, etc., are important, and having an infrastructure of policies that will enable us to analyze new challenges together is what will be facilitating these topics, how local production can react to shocks and also to move towards a higher above level in terms of international value chains. So these 4 paths would have to be taken by each one of the economic sectors in the region in order to reach these goals. Alvaro, I'd like to ask you, which one do you believe, or what is the role, the current role of union or these groups, sectors for SMEs? What I said before, well, a comment made by Amelia in terms of what you said. I'd like to touch upon something before I answer. The need to know the capacities of countries nowadays. They don't have to make large investments, and they don't have to create a long-term project that in the end we don't know how much will be possible. So if we want to know the capacity that Mexico has, that Peru has, with technical competencies and the workers that they have now, if they have, well, it is important to have an integrating vision at the international level. How much digital technological development, as Amelia said before, how much is important? How much of this human capital is highly qualified to be able to insert itself in the global market by means of the current value chains? I think that each one of the countries should be responsible for this, and this should be happening before they face how to do it. So this would compel you to know exactly how you will be offering some competencies, comparing one country to another one. There are some countries that are more adapted in terms of re-exports and exports of products or services or distribution channel or supply channel. All this analysis can come out of that. And now with regards to your question and the role that the trade unions play, these trade unions or these chambers or associations or entities, as Fernando was saying in today's first panel, he talked about international agencies that also have to, first of all, have a vision of being able to respond to what SMEs require. SMEs, as was mentioned this morning, nowadays the owners of companies do it all. They're managers, they wear a tie, they go to the bank, they check the products, then they have to collect. So it is something it is impossible for these business people to be able to do some trade intelligence. They cannot prepare market strategies. It could also be impossible for them to establish contacts. All of these services for training, establishing contacts, of having commercial intelligence, and of detecting which ones are the stakeholders and the experience in terms of what can happen in the market. And
It is about minimizing the risk. It is about building bridges so we can go ahead with a minimum risk. This is something that we can do in terms of the professional or trade associations. And also the services in terms of assessment and communication amongst the regional and domestic perspective. But it's by means of these clusters, it's by means of these trade associations. We need to provide services to different sectors. It doesn't have to be to the whole SME sector. We have specializations. For instance, logistics. We can have people that work in logistics and we can solve their problems and we can accompany them. And this is a solution that we can implement by working with the public sector, by working with the authorities in the country and the private sector. The SME will feel backed up in terms of the uncertainty, because they will be certain that they will be successful. We are talking about SMEs, but there is a new concept, the startups. We are talking about many startups that are becoming members of the market with a new concept, with a broader concept, with a more updated concept. So we have to take them into consideration. As it was mentioned this morning, they don't have associations, so it is very important to define the role of public-private alliances. So basically, this is what I can think of. Well, the trade associations can also promote identity. In this globalized world, we need to keep certain identity features in each of the countries. Yes, we are going to be working in the world. We're going to work in an integrated way, but we need to keep our identities, and this has to do with the brands, with the raw materials, and this is something that we have to define with each of the countries. And there is another subject, and this is something that we can tell investors. If you have a country, and in that country you have a business model, it is easier to get investment. It is easier to bring new players to the process, and they don't have to be the same players. We need to bring new markets, new products, and new companies, and this is something that we can do if we had intelligence. And this information can be generated by associations like ours. If we had time, we could talk about the different sectors where we have this big opportunity, especially in terms of SMEs in Latin America. Now let's talk about the case of Mexico. In Mexico, the outsourcing issue is rather polemic. The government has launched an initiative in order to get rid of this concept. Sandra, what are the implications of getting rid of outsourcing in terms of value chains, in terms of the loss of formal employment? I think this is rather controversial. From the economic perspective, there are some alternatives. Employers, SMEs can have different alternatives to continue being competitive. From the perspective of the worker, well, we have a different perspective. We needed to take into consideration another scheme, and some rights might be lost in the process. My personal point of view is that we have alternatives. It is not about optimizing. It is not about attracting efficiencies by means of reducing labor costs. I think we can improve costs in different ways. I'm not only talking about outsourcing. At some companies where I have worked as a consultant, the optimization of costs can be implemented by implementing or by applying best practices, for instance, in terms of technology use, inventory management, distribution plans. The benefits can be greater than reducing the labor cost. What are alternative solutions? And we need to remain within a legal system, a system that promotes the payment of taxes for the development of the country. I worked with some entrepreneurs, and we talked about the impact that this has, because changing from this scheme, the outsourcing scheme, to another scheme like the one being suggested, well, this change made them think that it was better to close down. So we need to analyze this type of alternatives. We have different choices for the employers, and in order to develop, because if there is a job, there is consumption and there is wealth. And this is what we were mentioning at the beginning of this event. In Mexico, SMEs represent 70% of the labor market in Mexico, so we need to find collaboration schemes in order to keep the labor force. I think this is something very important. Always taken into consideration the tax element. The owners of the companies needed to have flexibility. We are talking about technology, but technology calls for investment. We need to continue developing capacities, and this calls for an investment. Yeah, it is good to say that the SMEs need to develop, but it goes beyond a wish, because there are many elements that we need to take into consideration. So, we need to keep the labor force, and we need to promote the paying of taxes, and we need to take into consideration the situation of owners. This is something very important. During the pandemic, if the head count remained the same, there were some fiscal incentives, so they could keep the labor force. In Mexico, we had some support, and some people think that these supports were not sufficient. But changing radically without looking at the implications, because this can create an imbalance in terms of the worker, because we want to give all the rights to the worker, including social security. But yes, we need to have schemes so the owners can keep their headcount. They are concerned about the sales. They are concerned about paying the payroll. Outsourcing might not be the right scheme, but we have all the choices in order to keep the development of Mexico or any Latin American country. We have about 3 minutes, but I want to ask a last question to Adriana. As a Mexican, I think this is something very interesting. According to the OECD, there are some studies that show that Mexico could become the 7th economic power in the world in 30 years. This opportunity depends on the development of SMEs and the labor productivity. What do you think about this, Adriana? I do agree with this. Mexico, Latin America, Well, we have different economic and political business schemes with the adoption of a social implementation of this model. Well, if we do this, we can do it. We have the capability, we have the knowledge when it comes to the operations, and we have a way of making something a reality. So I can say, yes, I think this can become a reality. Obviously, this calls for a lot of effort, and we have to work together to achieve this, because this depends on the work of everyone with clear objective, and we have to think that all the opportunities needed to benefit everyone in the political, economic, and business area. And we need the participation of students. We need to be trained. We need to generate the knowledge that is necessary in order to promote the basic market, in order to generate this new agenda. Well, Adriana, thank you very much. And we're running out of time in this panel, the trends of the value global chains, the challenges and opportunities. Obviously, this year has been rather difficult in terms of the economy and health. Well, I want to thank you, Amelia, Alvaro, Sandra Aragonés, and Adriana Moreno. Thank you very much for this discussion. I was very happy to be here with you in order to talk about these very important subjects, especially now in the region. I want to thank CAF for the invitation. I love to participate at this CAF Conference 2020. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you to all the participants for these very interesting analyses. And remember that you can share your comments by means of our social networks using hashtag CAFPymes. Many entrepreneurs are following this conference by means of our YouTube channel and our social networks. CAF has a training online for the development of SMEs in the region. This is a free training course, and it's aimed at providing practical tools in order to implement strategic methodologies for SMEs. And you have the link at caf.com.
Agradecemos al público.
We want to thank the audience for being with us today, and we'll continue as of 9 a.m. Mexico City's time in order to continue with the second day of lectures. We'll be talking about digital transformation and different cases of success in the region and some challenges in terms of public policy. And we will have the award ceremony for the context ideas for the future. And remember to follow us at CAF, Agenda CAF. Thank you for being with us. Have a nice day. And we want to thank our media partners, El País and El Economista. Have a good day. Thank you.